Hi, welcome back. We now have, after having the fixed income automated session, we're moving on to the equities consolidated tape. And for that, we have our very own Graham Dick, who has been working on the consolidated tape working group full fix. He will be moderating the panel. And we have with him Nick Dutton, so Chief Regulatory Officer from Cboe Europe. We also have Cathy Gibson, who is Head of Dealing for Royal London Asset Management. Dan Riches, Head of Dealing for M&G Investments. Mark Montgomery of Strategy and Business Development at Big XYT. And again, our very own Jim Kaye, who's also been working on the Equities working group for the fixed trading community. So I will pass it over to Graham and look forward to hearing the debate. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, welcome everybody to another debate on the consolidated tape. In fact, this one is entitled Untangling the European Consolidated Tape. And when we first started talking about this, what we were going to discuss in the panel sort of back in late February for the original FIX conference, the subject of consolidated tape was what I would call red hot. There were multiple calls for evidence from regulators and the European Commission. There were a number of different studies and workshops that were being carried out. And it looked like we were hurtling towards, a solution for a consolidated tape fairly rapidly. What has happened since then, unfortunately, is that COVID has passed by there, and regulatory priorities have changed somewhat. And according to quote somebody from the European Commission, some of those market structure changes, including the consolidated tape, looks for the moment like it's been put on ice. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that as an industry, we cannot start moving forward and looking at various things for the consolidated tape once it becomes back on the regulators, in the regulators' headlights again. And the panel here today have got quite a lot of information and contributions to make, particularly with regards to the data standards and the improvement of data standards, which is core to what we've been working on in FIX. So what I would do is I'll the panel, as Rebecca's already introduced the panel, but I would just like to sort of put our first question up, and I don't know if the people can put the question on slide. The question we wanted to ask at the beginning is: do you think there is a structural issue with data quality? And in fact, part of the FIX working group believes that there has been issues. And so I thought I'd ask the first question to Jim. What have we been doing in the FIX working group over the course of the last 6 months or so to work on those data standards?
Hi, yeah, so firstly, hopefully you can hear me okay. The group basically got together because I think it was recognised that the answer to your question was broadly yes, there was a structural issue. And the first question was, well, what is that structural issue? I think it's safe to say that most people on the kind of practitioner side of the industry are concerned with this idea of addressable liquidity. They want to see the activity on the tape that is something that they are interested in, they could have participated in, they see as being price and volume forming, interesting to the stock in question. And so the first question the group asked itself was, well, what do we mean actually by addressable liquidity? Let's come up with a human language definition. And that's what the group did. And you'll see we have a couple of slides which we'll be showing during the course of this. And one of the things we did was actually, we've actually got the definition on there. And in summary, it basically talks about sort of on-venue activity, on-book activity, negotiated trades, things like that. And also SI and OTC activity that's considered to be non-technical, come on to that in a second. And also not activity that's done between affiliate entities of a single firm that would be considered to be for some kind of housekeeping purpose. And we came up with some definitions of that as well. So basically a lot of definitional work. What came out of the back of that was step 2. And step 2 was basically asking the question, well, now we've actually come up with something we can all agree on as meaning addressable liquidity. Where are the gaps in our current data flagging standards which mean that we can't unambiguously and completely identify activity that is indeed addressable. And we basically came up with 5 recommendations for new flags that we felt would plug the gap. We can go through those as well. And there is a rather comprehensive dictionary on this topic, which actually talks through what these recommendations actually are. But in summary, they're mostly to do with off-venue activity. They cover the inter-affiliate point. They cover what is deemed to be, they're on screen now, deemed to be a discrepancy between, or difference rather, between the ESMA definition of activity that does not contribute to the price discovery process and addressable liquidity. And what we basically came up with was this idea that if something is deemed to be not contributing to the price discovery process, there were 2 subcategories of that, one being benchmark trades, the other one being portfolio trades, which are addressable. So under current state, you can't simply use the non-price forming flags to identify something that is or isn't addressable, but you can if you start to identify or carve out those 2. Benchmark activity already has an ESMA flag, portfolio doesn't, so we're proposing to add one. And the others are mostly cleanups. The larger scale ones to do with deal with venues that operate on book and negotiated trade, large scale trades, and the inability to distinguish between them. Trades brought on venue for clearing purposes, something which is brought into the transaction reporting regime under MiFID II, and therefore has to be trade reported, but is clearly not interesting activity and not also able to be distinguished today. And the last one about out of trade reporting hours, which is it's a bit of an edge case, but we have seen this. If a trade is reported to an APA after the APA is closed, and this is perfectly legitimate, doesn't qualify for the MiFID deferral, but is reported nevertheless the following day, it gets mixed up in the wash with other trades actually being published at that time. So the ability to flag those would be important. What we also did, and this is part of the same step, was to document this through a mixture of use cases and through extensions to a rather comprehensive tree diagram that was produced during the MiFID days, what we call the RTS tree. And that basically shows how all these things can interact with each other and how and when to use them. The final step, and you'll find this on the slides as well, on the second slide, is what we might call a kind of data definition or data language definition of addressable liquidity, which basically says, look, if you adopt all these new flags in conjunction with the existing ones and you follow these rules, you come up with something which you can identify as addressable liquidity. And of course, the hope is that once the industry has implemented all this, some bright spark will be able to implement this heuristic, and you come up with a very simple I am addressable, I am not addressable flag on the trade, and that will be problem solved at last.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, just looking at that second slide, obviously, there are a lot of acronyms and sort of different ways of looking at this thing, which may be unfamiliar to a certain number of people. But those slides are in sort of the fixed deck, which is available. And if people have any specific questions around this, then they can either ask them during the course of this debate or come and talk to us afterwards. But Nick, over to you. I mean, once we've identified these different differences or improvements that we believe that could make a significant improvement to data standards. From your perspective, whether it be the APA or the reporting functionality, how will that impact, what is going in and what is coming out from the services that you offer to your customers?
Thank you, Graham. Well, I think, first of all, these are very welcome recommendations and clear up for us a couple of the big fuzzy areas that were left over. I mean, we're definitely of the view, as both a venue and an APA actually, that MiFID II was a good step forward from where we were with MiFID I in terms of the granularity of the flagging system. But I think a couple of examples that are picked out in these recommendations are actually examples of why a forum such as MMT or FIX is useful, because these things are dynamic. Just to pick two of them, LIS and clearing trades, these were, I suppose, unanticipated developments when we were all discussing what needed to go into MiFID II and what it should flag. LIS, negotiated trades, wasn't really thought about before because we didn't have caps on negotiated trades. So trades of whatever size were able to come on venue under the negotiated trade waiver. The imposition of the caps has meant, along with a general acceptance, not just from firms and market users, but from regulators as well, that actually large trades are a good thing, and actually you don't want to get in the way of them, has meant that we've had this parallel development of the LIS waiver alongside the waiver for large trades. Now, clearly, you don't want to flag for fills from large orders in order books because you're potentially giving away information, but actually identifying these large trades that are completed, you're not giving anything away, you're just enriching the information, which I think we all think is worthwhile. Equally, on the other side, the clearing trades, these were trades that were already being done on exchange, but they weren't being published. There was some language in MiFID I that allowed you to not publish trades that were effectively had already been reported elsewhere. MiFID II lost that language, once again, I think unintentionally, so we've ended up printing it, which is a huge amount of volume. For us, for our on-exchange negotiated trades, this can be over 90% of the stuff we publish are these clearing trades. They're very large, but they are, you definitely want to know that they are clearing trades and not some kind of price-forming event. So if we come to users and users, both contributors and consumers of the data, we've always found that the will is certainly there with our contributors. When you hear opposition to the consolidated tape, often people that don't want a consolidated tape will say that data quality is an impediment to getting one. And there is also a suggestion that somehow firms are deliberately not reporting business and as accurately as possible. Actually, our experience has been that everybody wants to get this right, not least because if they don't, they are getting grief from their own customers about how their trades are represented on screen. So actually, for the 5 recommendations, I think that the data is there and people will happily start to contribute this additional layer of granularity where they have to. It may be that we as an APA or venue can automatically append it. For users of our data or users of APA and venue data generally, it just helps us get one step further towards, as Jim was talking about, that holy grail of addressable liquidity. Once again, in the discussions leading up to MiFID II, we focused on various things that we'd want to identify, but there wasn't that actual specific focus on addressable liquidity, which has left us with this set of flags that, without these additions, doesn't quite get us there. We think that actually, when you talk about further review of MiFID, as has been going, it's been pushed out into next year, as we know, getting these last pieces of the jigsaw in place should be the priority. I mean, you have various suggestions about changes to pre-trade transparency, changes to trading functionality. What I think we've seen with MiFID II is actually you tend to be that there are natural levels of demand for different types of transparency arrangement or trading modality. And when you try, like they did with the caps, to suppress one, it doesn't necessarily lead to it popping up on a central limit order book. So actually, if the focus should instead on getting this post-trade tape right, ideally in a consolidated place, so with a consolidated tape, but that shouldn't stop us trying to get the input data right in the meantime. So implementing these recommendations, further enhancing the quality of that data, that does mean that we get this view on the tape of what's actually happening. We can see what is addressable liquidity. So when people are worried about where trades are going, are they on central limit order books or not? Are they on SIs or not? Actually, we're speaking from a position of a better understanding. Is this business appropriate to be on a central limit order book in the first place? Is it appropriate for a DART, or is it in fact just technical trades? So yeah, we'd welcome it. We're happily going to implement it on our platforms, and we think that this takes us a step towards, hopefully, a consolidated tape in the not too distant future.
Thank you. That's very interesting feedback. Mark, from a data analytics perspective, I mean, you're looking at the stuff which is actually coming out on the other side and trying to provide some analysis to your customers with the products you offer. What impacts will these changes have on improved transparency, and how much greater visibility will that offer to people consuming this data?
Thanks, Graham. I'd like to say that for Big XYT might not be a household name compared to some of the other panelist firms, and for those that aren't aware, we're a data analytics firm. We're totally independent and self-funded, and that's led to people coming to us to understand the granularity of the marketplace as the European and global markets have evolved, and regulatory change around MiFID II led to a requirement for people to understand the impact of those regulations and the impact of changes that weren't expected, as was mentioned by Nick, such as some of the large scale activity, and to address that, we don't just harvest the data and normalize it, but we also perform various calculations to subdivide the aggregated data into something that's a bit more usable. So, for example, we take the ESMA LIS thresholds every day for every stock. We normalize them for currency, and we calculate every trade that's below and above large and scale. And that's enabled us to perform some filtering. So maybe I could give some examples of that. We've tried to meet the demands of the community in understanding what is going on and what is addressable and what can be deemed to be non-relevant when you're looking at your trading activity. And the impact is dramatic because we've taken some filters on OTC trading. We capture every print and every tick down to nanosecond granularity. And what we did is we took of the available prints that we see, of which there are, of those 200 messages a second that we're capturing, we can actually look to see how many of those are relevant with the sub condition codes. So that's billions of rows of data that the team is looking through, and what we've been able to see is that a lot of those codes are not matching depending on who's reporting. So the people reporting to Nick are not necessarily calling the condition codes the same, even though it might be similar activity, or the same goes to the other APAs. So everyone has to deal with what's been reported to them. So there are 500 or more instrument status codes. There's over 1,000 condition codes that we deal with on a daily basis, just for different sub conditions. So within that, around OTC and large in scale, we performed some calculations, and we looked at the underlying condition codes for SI and OTC, of which there are over 250 different codes daily coming through as sub-condition codes. And we identified which of those we knew to be non-price forming. So they might have been something like a give-up trade, which isn't as clearly marked as actually it was about 18 months ago, a non-price forming trade, something that's clearly been defined within the condition code as not being addressable. And if we look at the volume of activity in the marketplace on a adjusted level, we can strip that out, and then we can also look at trades that are reported outside market hours. So anything that's printed on OTC or SI outside market hours is probably not systematic because it's not reported straight away. So if it's captured after the closing bell, we can reasonably assume that those prints are outside of the realms of addressable liquidity, even though they might be some sort of bilateral negotiation, but they could also be a synthetic trade of the type referred to earlier. And then finally, we look at large and scale prints, because generally speaking, stream liquidity from electronic liquidity providers tends to be below large and scale. And the community tends to agree that anything above large and scale is probably non-addressable on a stream basis, but could be as a result of a bilateral negotiation. So what that means is that if you look at dark trading, without those adjustments to bring it down to what is a proxy in our terms for addressable liquidity, dark goes from around 4 or 5% of gross reported liquidity up to about 8%. Lit exchange activity goes from about 37% to about 62%. That's for continuous MTF and lit order book activity. Auction trading goes from about 12 to 20% on a net basis. And the reason that happens is that the OTC activity, the non-SI OTC activity, goes down from about 22% of total reported volumes down to about 1%. And SI OTC activity goes down from about 23% to about 8 or 9%. So what we're saying is addressable SI liquidity is probably around about 8 to 9% of liquidity on a net basis once we've stripped out all of that non-addressable flow. And we've broken that down into above and below large and scale. We've broken it down into above and below SMS. And it just shows that 18% of the gross volumes are non-addressable, which leaves you with a picture which is very different if you're doing your TCA and trying to analyze the participation rates in your algos, because how are you going to know if you're dealing with something that could be double on a gross basis than it is on a net basis?
So what you've done there and the new flags that we're proposing effectively should solve many of those problems that or the challenges that you're seeing at the moment. I think that's the message that we're passing here. Okay. And then, I mean, Dan, from a buy-side perspective, I mean, you've been analysing data for a long time. I know it's sort of a part of your sort of passion to make sure that these data points are correct. You've seen some of these recommendations, and I know that we've also talked about how those are will be integrated within the MMT system and all the rest of it. How will this change your world, and will it impact your analysis of best execution and other important parameters that you're being asked to analyse, on a daily basis?
Good afternoon. Thanks, Graham. Who would have thought that my passion would have been data? Not sure what that means about me or the industry. But
well, you and I have had a few debates about this in the past, haven't we?
Quite. Not to take away from the fact that all the hard work that Jim, yourself and others do in this working group, all that it contributes to day-to-day trading and the life cycle of the investment process, it has become ever more important. And so as a buy-side firm, we're huge beneficiaries of all of this work and effort that goes in behind the scenes. And as Nick mentioned, post-MiFID II, we're in a far richer and, to my mind, better information age as far as trading goes. And it really helps in our analysis. But this kind of work didn't stop there. We still had a lot to do, certainly a lot of tidy up work. And this is the work that you guys are doing now. So what this will bring to us is very much enhancing or solidifying that data and making sure that it's standardized and more usable in its raw form. And as Mark talked about, there's a lot of refinement that goes into analysing this data currently. So as a buy-side desk, you have to make some subjective calls. Was that a fund-to-fund that's contributed to liquidity when you're trading? So, and lots of other examples. So through that chain of investment, you'll have portfolio analytics that look at the liquidity of a portfolio, and where the data isn't correct, that can skew whether or not that portfolio or that position is in fact investable or scalable. And that gets scrutiny through the chain from clients, dealers, fund managers, analysts, regulators, etc. But also on the desk, as I mentioned, when trading, traders are very keen to know, did they miss out on a print? Certainly the fund managers are keen to tell the dealer off when they've missed out on a print. It's quite easy or quite handy to turn around and go, no, it wasn't addressable. So it helps from the analytics point of view, but also the day-to-day trading, price discovery. Getting this right is really important. And then, of course, post-trade, TCA, when we look as a desk at the data that's coming through on the trading side, all of the dealers, all of the venues, all of the brokers that we assess, making sure that data is clean, is accurate, is absolutely key. And when we have conversations with our counterparties, and more so now, as Graham mentioned, with exchanges and venues, we want to make sure that when we're critiquing the quality of those venues, that we're making sure that we're all talking about the same thing and that the data's clean and it's accurate and standardized. And this is a huge step towards doing that. How this interlinks with a consolidated tape is, this is what a consolidated tape will bring. But as I mentioned at the start, I think I was on a panel 3, maybe 4 years ago. I asked what I would hope for in the next 2 or 3 years, and it was a consolidated tape. We've gone past that now. An industry really has to self-solve for a lot of the challenges that would have been solved by consolidated tape, and this is a huge step towards that.
And whilst you're there, Dan, I mean, sort of like the reaction, obviously, to the first question that we asked. I mean, I think about 90% of the respondents said that there is a sort of a structural issue with data quality. How far do we think these changes, will address that? I guess is the question I'd ask you. I mean, I know it's a sort of a finger in the air thing, but I mean, I certainly believe that a chunk of the problem should be addressed with just these 5 new flags. But what would be your view there?
Definitely keeps the momentum going forward. And once this work's complete, it enables the good work of the fixed community to then go on to the next thing. But you're right, it's a large chunk of work that can then be implemented and make sure that the post-trade tape is cleaner for everyone to use, for APAs, venues, brokers, buy side, etc. I don't know if I can put a percentage on it, but what it does do is free up the momentum to move forward to the next task.
Okay, and we've got a couple of questions, and so I thought I might as well sort of get those in sort of relatively early. But we've been principally talking here about the improvement of data standards for, which principally affect the OTC and SI data reporting. But there is the sort of the argument that says that are regulators looking to promote that OTC and SI trading, or are they looking to bring more trading back onto venues? And if there is more trading back on trading venues, does that mean that the application of these new flags has less value? Who would like to take that one?
I don't mind going first on that one. Yeah, I think some of the numbers that Mark mentioned, actually, because there is this narrative being pushed as part of the MiFID II review that there is somehow a crisis in lit trading, and that volumes are hemorrhaging off lit order books and onto dark platforms, and dark being used fairly generically to describe all sorts of different trading modalities. But actually, if I remember the numbers that Mark just gave us in terms of addressable liquidity, I think you said something like 60% on order book and 20% auctions out of addressable liquidity, which sounds to me as though multilateral lit venues are still pretty dominant. If we look at the SI volume, 7-8% of addressable liquidity again, yes, SI volumes have certainly gone up since MiFID II, but the actual business being done, what we saw was a transfer out of the unclassified BCNs onto these classified SIs. So once again, it isn't necessarily a transfer of volume off multilateral platforms and onto bilateral ones. Certainly, some of the SIs seem to be doing better and are getting larger. But I think from a regulatory perspective, or from a policy objective perspective, the focus needs to be outcomes for investors. Are investors and users of the market getting the results they want to out of the range of execution arrangements that are available? And to our mind, the best way to do this is through better data about execution received, whether that's through a consolidated tape, pulling it into one place, through better flagging of trades, or through TCA and analysis tools that are available to those investors. So, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else got a comment, or shall I move on to another question?
I think just to perhaps sort of echo what Nick was saying, I think one of the problems we've seen is that policymakers have a a difficult job because the data they are using to make their decisions is not clean. It's not in a way complete either. So, obviously we're hopeful that the changes we're proposing to make will clean up the data, make it much more granular, and sort of shine a light on what the regulators are actually looking at. And then they'll be able to make a more informed choice as to whether they are indeed meeting their policy objectives or not.
Okay, so
maybe just to add, Graham, as well. There's another category of trading that's we've observed gently increasing, and Nick's absolutely right. If you add auction and central limit order book activity across exchanges and MTFs, we see not that much difference over the last 3 or 4 years. We have seen the changing activity has been to a degree in this growth of OTC, but a lot of it seems to be non-addressable. So it's the way these things are being printed. And then there's also this element of off-book on-exchange flow, which we see creeping up quite a lot. Now, to our understanding, that's made up of two disparate types of flow. One is likely to be RSP flow, which tends to be smaller size, where ELPs and regulated market makers are making prices to the retail community. And then the other end of the scale is the sales trader. The other end of the scale is the sales trader blocks that are being negotiated off book. And again, as an alternative to the systematic and technology-driven matching engines for dark blocks, which also play a significant role in sourcing liquidity. But sales traders, despite their forecast demise 5 years ago, are still going strong.
Going strong. Okay. In the interest of time, sorry to cut in there, but I'd like some of the other sort of chair people on the panels. I'm getting little rings coming in saying we've got a certain amount of time left, and there's one sort of another round of an important question that I really would like to ask is that we have a consensus, and certainly I think that and I hope the audience, but amongst the panel, we have a consensus that these 5 recommendations will genuinely make a difference and will genuinely improve market transparency. But for it to happen, we need to get everybody out there and make it happen. So, Jim, with your sort of like school teacher hat on, there's probably some homework we need to get our various members to do. And what is that homework, and how quickly do we need to get them to do it?
That's why no good fixed panel is complete without setting some homework to the
Exactly.
So, audience, I see this as a 4-step process. The first step, which is basically coming up with the theory, which basically is the 5 recommendations and the associated collateral in terms of how you use them, which is really the responsibility of the Equities Consolidated Tape working group. I mean, that's basically done. We have the documentation. It's all there for us to see. Step 2 is the actual data modeling. And this is where the MMT, Technical and Steering Committee, come in, and indeed already have come in. And we are working with those guys to basically start to take these recommendations and actually model them inside the MMT data structure. And this is, of course, and for those of you who don't know what that is, this is basically the kind of single data model that's really there to span on-venue and off-venue activity, certainly across Europe, but ideally globally, and basically just provides a really, really good model for how to classify all sorts of data, trade data. So that's the step 2, and that's happening right now. The third one is to actually take those standards, what you might consider to be a blueprint for implementation, and basically turn them into the actual implementations or theoretical implementations in the various messaging protocols. So the fixed GTC will be involved in that. The various organizations who actually provide their own proprietary market data protocols, the itch, things like that, will need to get involved at that stage as well, and basically modify their protocols to include these new flags where they need to. And finally, and this is where everyone needs to sit up and pay attention, we need to get on and implement it. Now, clearly, the final step can't happen until the others have completed, and in particular, the steps 2 and 3. They are in progress right now. They're going to take a few months to conclude. My suggestion to those of you who are interested in this is think about this as a 2021 implementation project. start to think about what you need to do to your systems to implement those 5 recommendations, given that you haven't got the implementation detail yet, but you kind of know functionally what you'll need to do. Start thinking about it now. Start thinking about getting into your budgeting processes, because this is the sort of thing we want to start building next year as an industry. Otherwise, we'll just lost another year.
Implementation, Nick. How can you encourage your members to implement?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. We certainly promote accurate use of it. We make MMT is mandatory in our both our APA and our venue, so we certainly support it. And you wouldn't get away with reporting via our channels without using MMT. I suppose accurate use of MMT is another thing we can certainly encourage. But I do think there is still a role for regulators. Once the industry has developed the model, there's a role for regulators, because it's only the regulator who has that cross-market, I suppose, perspective. They can see what the firms are doing, they can see what the APAs are doing. And notwithstanding my earlier comment about everyone, is trying to do the right thing, you will get cases where we've seen different firms will have different internal legal views, and then until they see something with an ESMA or if you're in the UK, an FCA header on it, they won't be able to overturn those internal legal opinions to allow them to report, even when they know that peers are reporting in a different way. So combination of the industry developed standard, good guidance dealing with the issues of contention from the regulatory bodies, and then also supervision, just to check that people are actually doing what they should be.
Okay, thank you. And Dan, what will you be saying to your brokers about implementation of these standards? Does 2021 sound realistic, not only from a broker perspective, but also from a buy-side perspective?
Well, what we would say is we'd cut you all off unless you adopt it.
Oh, that sounds like a good idea. That'll get them moving.
Like we used to say many years ago, we like using electronic for communication of orders. Fix was that first conversation. It was a tough conversation with some of our counterparties to say to adopt Fix in the first place. This is just the evolution of that conversation. So there's no point using it but not using it to its full capacity. And so where we have the ability to all have standardized data and have better conversations around quality of execution, and we're all comparing data in the same way, that's critical, and that we would communicate that to our brokers. And one of the reasons I might be passionate about data is because it causes me a whole bunch of headaches when you talk about trade and transaction reporting. It's clearly very important in the ecosystem at the moment, and having conversations with our counterparties about them not returning the right MIC codes, etc., is just painful and a waste of time for everyone. So I'll echo Jim's comments and just say that please try and get ahead of this and plan for the future. Just don't wait for it and hope for the best at the time. This is coming and we'll all benefit from this. But it isn't just counterparties. Mark's talked about the importance in the post-trade, in the TCA work that big XYT does, and that will help them be more efficient and more and provide a better service to everybody. But that's EMS providers, OMS providers should all get ahead of this and make sure that functionally they're able to consume this data and produce it through the chain to everybody that's both sending it and receiving it. So it's not just our counterparties, it is also everyone involved in the chain of execution.
Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, and just with sort of like a few minutes left, and I'll just check in a second if there's any more questions, and please send them through if you have any. But just sort of one last question to the panel, and I'll go around again, starting with Jim, if I may. I mean, the title of this panel is Untangling the European Consolidated Tape, and we've I mentioned at the beginning that that may have been pushed back a little while. But how far, in your opinion, or in the panel's opinion, do you think that the implementation of these standards will untangle some of that European consolidated tape, and in order of speedier implementation, should those opinions change? So start with you, Jim.
Right, sure. I think I think obviously, given the view of the group that came up with the standards or the recommendations, that group and myself included, think it's going to basically do a very thorough job. At the same time, there are still some details to be worked out. I mean, one thing I mentioned at the beginning was this idea that you have intra-affiliate trades, well, trades between affiliates that are done for housekeeping purposes should be considered non-addressable. What does housekeeping purposes mean? So we need to come up with a definition of that. So I think there's still work to do, even in the theory. We've got the modelling right, but I think some of the usage and scenarios still need to be worked out. And if we don't get that right, and if we done on a very consistent basis and somehow consider the enforcement around that, we're going to end up in a better place than we are now, but perhaps not quite as good a place as we could be.
Okay, thank you. Nick, does this untangle? Can it accelerate the process when it becomes back on the regulatory roadmap?
It's a step towards it. Personally, I think the suggestion that data quality isn't good enough to have a consolidated tape is fundamentally wrong, but that's not to say it's not worth doing. I'm reminded of the quote from the golf film Tin Cup: perfection is unattainable, and that's the glory of it, but we should always strive towards it. So I think all these improvements are helpful. It helps to further counter the argument that we can't have a consolidated tape because the data isn't good enough. And it, in of itself, it's a welcome step forward.
Mark, in 30 seconds.
Yeah, just the fact that consistency is really, really important with this, and we need consistency over time. It's all very well to look at a snapshot, but that only tells you a small part of the story. So the sooner we get these changes in place, the better. Everyone can observe the same standards. You'll be comparing apples to apples, and you're doing it consistently over time, which helps you make better decisions around what behaviours you need to change.
And Dan, the final word of you?
I agree.
Well, that makes it very simple.
It's all been said.
Good. Okay, well, I think that our time is up. So, listen, thank you, everybody, for a very interesting debate. 2021 is definitely the date for, we want to try and implement this. And this should take us a good step forward to untangling the European Consolidated Tape and implementing one as soon as we possibly can, which is certainly, in my personal view, a necessity. Anyway, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks for the brilliant moderation, and thanks for the great panel. We're now going to take another quick break, go and grab a coffee, cup of tea. It's getting to that point in time, maybe even grab a beer or a glass of wine. And we are then going to be going into the buzzword of the day, or no longer just a buzzword, but we're talking about ESG is no longer a fringe concept, sustainable investing post-COVID-19. What's the impact on asset management? And we've got Rebecca Healy coming back to moderate it. Thanks a lot, guys.